Here's Chris.
Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to NewsNation. Decision Desk HQ, our polling watching partner, can now say that the GOP will take control of the House of Representatives and therefore all of Congress. Now, why aren't you hearing this everywhere? Because NewsNation once again has called it first. The real question is why. Again, DDHQ has been on its game. And just as important, unlike a lot of other outlets, NewsNation has no preference in the outcome as long as it is accurate and fair. So there's nothing for us to wait for. If this is what it is, this is what it is. So now let's talk about what it will mean for you, me, and our entire country. With both houses, President-elect Trump will likely be able to get legislation through. Now, as we've seen in the past, a president with both houses can get one, maybe two major pieces done, okay? Then the midterms come, which have been historically punitive to the sitting president. But these days, who knows what happens? But here's what we do know, okay? While it will take time for Democrats and dissatisfied voters to process the loss, that's not really unusual, especially when it came as a surprise, which it did to many here. They're going to have to move through blame, all these hollow hindsight reckonings. That's their fate for now. That shouldn't be our focus. Our focus should be forward. Trump and co. must be forward focused on what they will do to help as many as they can in this country and abroad. Already, President-elect Trump is sounding like former Trump too often, talking about the past and matters that just simply don't matter. I know the media, or really social media, feeds off this, but our real needs get starved as a result. The conversation collapses into this stupid blame game of who can say the most obnoxious thing. I don't believe that, Trump is Trump, and he says things that, I don't want to hear that anymore. It's not enough for us right now. This is Donald Trump's last time to serve, and he needs to be about more than going after Anthony Scaramucci for what he says on some morning cable show. Yes, I heard all the buzz about this. I didn't reply online because it's nonsense. There is no interview with me and Anthony Scaramucci that led to his getting fired. There's a whole story to why he got fired. Had nothing to do with me or us being, Italian friends. It's just a waste of time. The only interesting thing about it is how much younger I was just a few years ago. This is what life can do to you. So forget about the past. Forget about the drama. What legislation will you advance? Immigration? Tax and regulation cuts? Might this administration try to do them together? Today, especially today, we are reminded about why our president has to be more than the tweeter-in-chief. There is awesome responsibility. There is awesome need to take care of us and those who take care of us. Today, we say thank you, right? To the men and women who are serving and have served, our veterans. America is not what she is or how she is regarded around the world without you, men and women. Our service men and women and their families matter. They deserve honor and attention, and not just today. There is a need for a focus on them in this new administration. Here's the good news. Unemployment for veterans, reportedly at a historic low, lower than the rest of society. But they do have higher rates of mental health problems, issues that can go untreated. 17 a day die by suicide, the #1 gun crime in America. That number is 50% higher than the rest of society. And while the current administration helped the situation, there is still a large portion of homeless veterans in this country. So those who risked everything for us may get our attention today, but there's a lot more we need to give back to them every other day of the year. Now, one specific concern that ties Veterans Day into the news is the simple fact that we have 40 to 50,000 troops in the Middle East right now. Did you know that? A lot of them are in harm's way. You know, they're just there to prevent and protect, but you got them in Syria, and you have them in the Middle East, you know. And when you look at the zone, Israel is in this intense conflict, right? But it's on several fronts. And the United States has a lot of troops inside that danger zone. And now you have Turkey and the Kurds starting to heat up about active conflict. We have troops in that region also who could be vulnerable. So should they be taken out? Should the strategy be changed? This is what we should be talking about. This is what we should be hearing from President-elect Trump. And so let's start there with a member of his transition team who's getting a lot of attention for how she may serve in a Trump administration, former member of Congress, now Republican, Tulsi Gabbard. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Chris. Where are you? I thought you were going to be here.
I am in Florida because I'm going to do the Patrick Bet David podcast. So I had to come down so I could be here. And then my back went out. So only for you, Tulsi, because I know how tough you are. You could push me down with literally your pinky right now, not your thumb like you would usually do. All right, so let's talk about everybody else and what matters here. The fact that we have all these troops in the region, this is an issue of sensitivity for you about where America is and why. Do you believe that this is something that will be rethought by the Trump administration?
Well, thank you, Chris. It's good to be with you on your show, and I appreciate you recognizing our veterans, my brothers and sisters in uniform, and the many challenges that our veterans in this country still face alongside their families. And to me, the most important commitment that veterans and servicemen and women should have from our leaders in this country, the best way to recognize that service and sacrifice and to say thank you is to make sure that our men and women in uniform are only sent into harm's way, are only sent to war as a last resort, after all measures of diplomacy have been exhausted. Now, this is one of the many reasons why I think so many Americans turned out to vote for President Trump, is because he understands this. And we've seen how through his last administration, he didn't just talk about ending wars. He actually went out and did that work of direct diplomacy. He went out and met with dictators and adversaries in that pursuit of peace for the American people. So in his next administration, and he was very vocal about this throughout this presidential campaign, that his goal is to end wars, not start them. His goal is to prevent World War III and nuclear war, and spoke many times about things that Kamala Harris never brought up during her campaign, about how he understands the seriousness of the stakes and the threats that we face as the American people, specifically because of the foreign policy decisions made under the current administration. And so I can tell you, as someone who still wears the uniform, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve, as someone who's deployed to multiple war zones in different parts of the world, the most important responsibility that any president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. And it's important on this day as Veterans Day, as well as you said, as every day, to recognize the best way to ensure our gratitude is shown to those who serve and their families is to make sure war is a last resort, and if it is required, that we take care of our men and women in uniform if and when they come home.
LTC Gabbard, I thank you for your service, of course, and your family, because the whole family serves, no matter which member it is. The sacrifice is real, and you may serve again. What is your attitude towards being a member of the Trump administration?
President Trump is going through, and I know this is how he's spending a lot of his time right now, is looking at making these decisions about who he wants to serve on his team and in his cabinet. If there is any way that I can help achieve that goal and objective of preventing World War III and nuclear war, of course, I'd be honored to serve.
Where do you think you would be of most help to President Trump in this administration?
In a place where I can do that. There are a few different roles, I think, within this administration. But again, President Trump will make his decision, and it looks like he's already making some announcements this week.
They're coming out. We're seeing them. But you've never been one to want to play politics. Have you been active in the process, or you're just waiting to be asked?
No, I've been active as a member of the transition team. As you know, Chris, there are thousands of positions that a new administration has to fill within all of these federal agencies. And so we are doing our best to try to bring people together who support President Trump's vision, specifically as it relates to national security and foreign policy, to try to prevent what happened last time, which was he ended up with some neocons around him who were trying to, and I saw this as a member of Congress, they said yes to his face, and then around his back were trying to undermine his objectives so that they could feed their goals of continuing to keep us in a perpetual state of war to the detriment of the American people and our troops.
Yeah, I get you, but you got to be careful with just putting loyalists around you right? I mean, you want better minds to the extent that you can have them.
It's people who are committed to the Constitution, who support our democratic republic, and the mandate that President Trump has been given by the American people in this election through the popular vote and the electoral vote to reject the neocon warmongers and actually work towards bringing about peace.
So let's talk for a second about what that looks like. The 40 to 50,000 that we have in the region, is that something that should be on the table for reassessment? Because I don't care where they are, they're certainly not completely safe. So is that an okay risk for America now?
I'm sure this is on President Trump's mind, and he will look to see where our troops are, where they are in harm's way, where they are based around the world, and make his decisions as commander-in-chief in all of these examples of does their presence, does their deployment, does their mission actually serve the best interests of the American people and our national security. He's obviously been very vocal about what that means and what that looks like throughout this campaign, and that assessment will come.
Wouldn't it be a mistake to try to negotiate peace between Ukraine and Russia by meeting only with Putin?
I'm not going to speak for President Trump. I know that he knows how to make a deal. He's done it in the past many times, and he said over and over when he's asked about this question, his goal is to end the war and stop people from being killed. He will determine the best way to do that.
In your estimation, do you think Ukraine has blame in what started this conflict?
This is a bigger topic than we have time for, Chris, and there's a long history there.
Well, I'll give you the time.
Both between Russia and Ukraine, the history there with NATO. Ultimately, this is a proxy regime change war that's taking place, and sadly, it is the Ukrainian people and their lives that are suffering and being destroyed as a result. And I will never forgive Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and all of their cronies for standing in the way and rejecting multiple peace efforts that have been taken place by leaders of other countries, putting the Ukrainian people's lives needlessly at risk. This war could have ended a long time ago. I am grateful that President Trump will very soon be in a position to stop this needless and senseless loss of life.
I know. You know what the problem is, though, right? I mean, even through this weekend, I have a lot of contacts in Ukraine. I've done a decent amount of coverage and work over there, and they feel like they're going to be put in a position where they have to give up land in order for there to be peace, and that is not what the Ukrainian people have given as a mandate to their president.
We live in a real world, Chris, and as we look throughout history, every major war has ended because a peace treaty has been brokered where almost everyone at the table walks away without everything that they wanted. The goal here is peace. The goal here is to save people's lives. I'm sure throughout these negotiations there will be a lot of back and forth, as there always is. We don't live in a fantasy world. We've got to make sure that we are rooted in a pragmatic reality of how do we end this war as quickly as possible.
In getting to deal with former President Trump, President-elect Trump now, one of the major concerns that I will entertain is, does he have a different mindset, a different focus? You know, when he put out his post, or whatever you call it, on Truth Social today about me and Anthony Scaramucci, I don't know why he's spending time on that kind of stuff. Have you gotten a feel for whether or not he has a sense of the urgency and what he needs to be this time versus last time?
Well, there's no question that he feels a sense of urgency about the mandate that the American people have mandate the American people have given him through this election. The man is tireless. I know we've heard that before. I've actually witnessed it and experienced it myself. He has the ability to multitask. He is a far more prolific tweeter than I have ever been. That's him. That's his style. It's his way of communicating directly with the American people and not allowing anyone to be a filter for him. So I know the work that he's putting in now to start to build this team, speaking with leaders around the world. He is very focused on the job ahead, and I'm sure he's looking forward to starting on day one.
Well, Tulsi, I'll make you this promise. No matter where you serve, in whatever capacity, you have an open invitation here to discuss what matters to the American people.
Thank you.
For the duration of your involvement. And I appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for your service that you've done in the past, that you're doing now, and that you may do in the future.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, be well. Best to you and the family. 4 minutes and 5 seconds. Coming up, my friend, Professor Alan Lichtman. He was 10 out of 10, maybe 9 out of 10. Now, he definitely got this one wrong. Why? What has he figured out? And why are you people making death threats against him? Why? Why? Who does that help? I want to bring him on to figure out what he's figured out and what he's dealing with. Next.
A path-breaking victory, the first woman president, Kamala Harris. My predictions have stood the test of time. The keys are the North Star, the unchanging system.
And you are sticking right now that the keys predict that Vice President Harris wins the election in 6 days.
That's right. It's possible, but a lot would have to go wrong for Harris to lose.
So it was possible, and it happened. Why? And how does that change the reckoning of what the keys mean and how they should be applied? Professor of American History at American University, the father of the 13 keys, Alan Lichtman. Good to see you, Professor.
Always good to be with you, and I do have a pretty deep explanation.
Oh, I want to hear it. So I just want to say off the top, you know, you're a friend of mine, and I don't like people coming after you, especially after the fact. It's like, you know, one side was mad at you when you made the prediction. Now the people are mad at you after the prediction. I'm sorry, but, you know, I guess these days, perversely, it's a sign that you're relevant, Professor. I guess you can sell it to yourself that way, but boy, do people suck. What did you figure out about the analysis of the race?
Yes, as I said, things could go wrong. There could be unprecedented events that change the pattern of 160 years of history. That's what happened here. Two things. Number one, disinformation. We've always had disinformation, but disinformation has exploded to an unprecedented degree. You talked about a grievance election, but a lot of that grievance was driven by disinformation. Starts with Fox News and conservative media, conservative podcasters with tens of millions of views. But we've seen something brand new this time. The 300 billionaire Elon Musk putting his thumb on the scales through his control of X, formerly Twitter. It's been reported that his misinformation has had billions, literally billions of views. And this has spread to every aspect of this election. There is misinformation about everything about the economy, inflation, jobs, unemployment, the stock market, growth. There is vast disinformation about undocumented immigrants, you know, that they're supposedly killers who are out to get you. In fact, studies by Cato and the National Institute of Justice show undocumented immigrants are the most law-abiding segment of our society, committed crimes and violent crimes, less than half that of native-born Americans. It spread to the hurricane relief, spreading lies that hurricane relief dollars were being diverted to migrants. It's lies about the Ukraine war, that somehow Ukraine was responsible for having one of the world's great powers invade a third or fourth-rate power. And, you know, as scholars have shown, once you dissolve truth, democracy dissolves along with it. The way authoritarianism takes hold, and is taking hold all over the world, not just here, is not through force, but through the manipulation of information. As George Orwell warned in 1984, in that dictatorship, war is peace, famine is plenty. The other thing that's unique about this election is the explosion of elements that have always been present, the dark side of American history, but that have been agitated to an unprecedented degree in this election. And I'm talking about racism, misogyny, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, with a woman of color being a particular target. And these things cross ethnic and racial lines. The first xenophobic law in America goes all the way back to 1798, the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Right.
And guess who the enemy was then? The French, who were ethnically and racially indistinguishable from the settlers in England. Then it's the Jews, the Germans, the Irish, the Mexicans, the Muslims. There's always an other. And, I can give you example after example of how these issues.
No, but look, we get it. I get the concepts. I just want to test the application with the context of what we saw happen in the election. So I stipulate, of course, and I know it makes some people uncomfortable, but race and gender matter in America in choosing leaders.
They always have.
It can be positive. It can be negative. I think sometimes it's a percentage of both, but it's real. I don't dispute that. There's no reason to be ignorant. However, when you look at this, it leads to a suggestion, Professor, that all the white people came out to vote for Trump and not the black woman. We don't really see that
as I explained,
in the
it's
demos.
not limited to white people. That's
right, because black voters didn't come out. The Democrats lost because they underperformed, Alan. The Democrats lost because they underperformed. They misread the main motivators for the voters, and they underperformed. Black women pulled a heavy load for the Democrats again, but they couldn't overcome black men, Latino women, married women. Even though reproductive rights matters, it wasn't everything for them. And you saw it in a lot of demos. So can it just be as simple as we're racist?
Absolutely not. I never said that. I think the most important thing is disinformation, which affects everyone. It even extends to reproductive rights. Get this, 17% of voters thought Biden was responsible for overturning Roe versus Wade. This disinformation poisons our democracy. You can't
but
have
don't
a
you
democracy
always have
governed by
But
falsehoods.
don't you always have a segment of... But Alan, we've always had that. You always have a segment of stupid.
Nothing like
you
this.
have like 20, 30% of people who believe the earth is 2,000 years old. There's a slice of what we used to call flat earthers, right? And people who are going to believe things that aren't true because they want to believe them. But really, you really believe Elon Musk cost Harris the election?
I didn't say Elon Musk. I gave you a whole litany of how we've had an unprecedented degree of misinformation that affected every aspect of this election. The economy, immigration, reproductive rights, foreign policy, hurricane aid. I can go on and on. We have never seen anything like this before in the history of the country. Even Joe Rogan said 4 hours before the election was called, Elon Musk had this app which said, "Oh, I know the election is over." That's something extraordinary. When I was a kid, I read these science fiction books. The premise was a few mega rich people are able to control society. Well, we're not all that far from it. And I am sounding the alarm, and I don't think I'm the only one.
Do you have to add a key? Do you have to adjust the keys?
That is very, very possible. I admitted I was wrong. I admitted the keys don't work. Remember, the premise of the keys is that a rational, pragmatic electorate decides whether the White House party is governed well enough to get 4 more years. But if the views of the White House party are controlled by disinformation, particularly driven by those who are so rich that they have extraordinary influence beyond anyone else, then maybe the premise of the keys needs to be changed. I have 4 years to figure this out. I haven't figured it out yet, Chris, and you've helped me.
Well, you're not going anywhere, Professor, because your value to me is not just the keys. You have an encyclopedic knowledge of trends and history and application to the norms. I want you here well before we start talking about the next election. I'm not ready for that psychologically or emotionally. We'll just talk about the state of play going forward and what we do about how we come to understand the world around us. You're right. It is a challenge. Professor Alan Lichtman, you are one of the greats. Nothing changed just because you got one wrong. Happens to me every 15 minutes. Take care, sir.
You know where to find me.
All right. Professor Alan Lichtman, appreciate you. And I'll tell you what, I will bet you, okay, he's going to figure out a way to tweak that system because he's going to learn from the failure. And that is the sign of somebody you want to be in business with, right? Dusty just got in my ear. As we go to break, 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Senator Rubio from Florida, where I am right now, he will be Secretary of State if he can get through the confirmation process. I got to tell you, we'll figure out how to talk about that because it's a really interesting full circle. Little Marco, Trump should be selling watches on 34th Street. That's what Marco Rubio said. Then he had the jittery water bottle. Now he's going to be Secretary of State. You see what happens? It never ends. What does it mean that Rubio is Secretary of State? We'll talk about it when we come back.
Called Project 2025, a 922-page blueprint to make Donald Trump the most powerful president ever.
And his agenda is all laid out in Project 2025.
They wrote it out. It's 900 pages. It's called Project 2025. This playbook is a goddamn nightmare.
Project 2025 is the biggest attack on our system of government and our personal freedom that has ever been proposed in the history of this country.
People didn't buy it. Democrats thought that, Project 2025 would kind of be the manifestation of the next step of the concerns about Donald Trump, that it's not just his mouth. It's that the men and women around him are going to make him what he would love to be, which is an autocrat. That was their theory. Didn't work, okay? So look, my take on it, having actually gone through all 900 pages, which is no small task, and a lot of it in there is really extraneous or way too in the weeds. But this came from the Heritage Foundation. Okay, this is a bastion of conservative think. And almost all of the ideas in there are things I've absolutely heard about in terms of the small footprint of government, right? And the idea of the executive having a unified executive, which has been litigated since the 1920s about what a president can do versus what Congress needs approval to do. So they want to get rid of the Department of Commerce, education, eliminating government DEI programs, which would, arguably really make vulnerable trans people. And the list goes on. So during the campaign, Trump said what he always says: I don't have any idea what it is. I never read it, which I believe. And I don't know anything about it, even though 140 advisors from his last administration were involved with it. So now that he's won, what is the significance of that? But even more importantly, where I want to start is with the news that Senator Marco Rubio of Florida is Trump's choice to be Secretary of State. Let's bring in one of the chief architects of Project 2025, president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts. Kev, good to see you.
Chris, thanks for having me.
Also, before you say anything, also author of the new book, Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America, which, in my looking through it today, I haven't had a chance, Kevin, yet to read it deeply, but it is the corollary to what the theory of the case is about what conservatives want for America. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Marco Rubio, right choice? Why?
Right choice, 100%. Senator Rubio is a personal friend, a great friend of the Heritage Foundation. Those two things are unimportant compared to the most important characteristic, which is that Senator Rubio personifies what most conservatives have gone through in terms of an ideological evolution regarding foreign policy. When Mr. Rubio ran in 2016, as you no doubt remember, Chris, he called himself the son of the Reagan Revolution. He and I are about the same age. I often refer to myself the same way. And the sons and daughters of the Reagan Revolution who talk about this mindset of peace through strength realize that 20 years ago with the the perhaps poorly intentioned incursion in Iraq, maybe the right incursion in Afghanistan, that the United States has to evolve from this neoconservative adventurism around the world for a host of reasons. Senator Rubio is an intellectually honest guy who's spoken about that. And even in domestic policy, he's spoken about the importance of a proper economy, a free market economy flowing from a healthy society. All of that tells me he's a thoughtful guy. Even people who disagree with him know him to be intellectually honest, be a great colleague. I can't think of another man or woman who would better represent the United States now, all Americans, not just conservative Americans, than Marco Rubio.
What do you make of this emerging notion that Ukraine bears blame for the conflict with Russia? Tulsi Gabbard just referred to Zelensky as a proxy government change. I don't understand that. He has nothing to do with Russia. The people in Ukraine have wanted to get away from the Russian grip, Poroshenko and all that stuff. That was an earlier generation. Zelensky's not part of that. But it seems to be a manifestation of this thinking on the right that Zelensky's part of the problem. Ukraine doesn't have clean hands, and that's why they're going to have to give up land to get a peace deal. Do you buy all that?
Well, we have a different criticism of Mr. Zelensky and Ukraine at the Heritage Foundation, and it's this. You no doubt know that 2.5 years ago, we were the first major conservative public policy group, at least headquartered in Washington, D.C., to oppose military aid to Ukraine, not because their cause was unjust. We, of course, wanted then and we want now the Ukrainians to prevail because Putin is so evil, and this incursion into their sovereignty and territory, I think, speaks for itself. But the issue was that the United States had no grand strategy. The United States never really, beyond 4 hours and 41 minutes of debate on the House and Senate floors, talked about what the end strategy would be. That's much more about American process, Chris, than it is about the Ukrainians. But I do have to make this point, and I don't do so to be credulously critical of the Ukrainians who've been heroic. Every year, the Heritage Foundation publishes the Index of Economic Freedom, and routinely, the nation of Ukraine is just 10 spots from the bottom. It is simply, just objectively speaking, one of the most corrupt countries on the planet. Mr. Zelensky deserves some credit for trying to clean some of that up. There are some objective analyses that suggest that has stalled. Perhaps that makes sense. All of this points to the same conclusion that Tulsi Gabbard has arrived at, which is that leaving the mechanics to President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Vance and apparently Secretary of State designate Marco Rubio, we do believe it is in the best interest of the Ukrainian people to establish peace. Interestingly, the political desire for that in Ukraine has increased dramatically over the last year.
Well, there's going to be fatigue over time. But what message does it send if you let Putin, who you call something we've never heard Trump even come close to saying, which is that he's evil, if you let them keep a chunk of the country, what makes you think you're not encouraging them to go after another more direct NATO ally?
Well, I don't think two things can be true, or two particular things can be true at the same time. One, the very valid question you just asked, and the other, the claim that routinely Mitch McConnell and advocates for even more money being spent on Ukraine have made, which is that the reason the United States needs to send Ukraine more military aid is to harm the Russian military. That, in other words, what they're saying is it's worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Ukrainian lives in order to denude the Russian military. Those two things can't be true at once, which leaves us, our scholars at Heritage, to the following conclusion. Russia's going to win this war. There is no scenario in which the Ukrainians can win. I don't like saying that. I lament saying that, Chris. And ultimately, a majority of the American people are saying, let's preserve as much Ukrainian territory as we can. Let's place massive sanctions and repercussions on the Russians as a matter of disincentive, to your very good point. And then let's have a lot more confidence with Donald Trump back in office, because you no doubt remember that there were no wars started during his first term. There is a reason for that. The world knows not to mess with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I don't know. I wrestle with it. You make a cogent case, Kevin. There's no question about that. But I have a correlation versus causation problem when it comes to Trump and what happened on his watch and what didn't. What was fomenting on his watch, what people were able to do because of our distracted focus and chasing our own tail. But we'll see how it plays out, and we'll see what Trump does, and I'm open on that. The only thing I do want to give you a chance to address, Kevin, before I let you go, is Project 2025's main criticism was this is an overt attempt by the right to disenfranchise minority groups it doesn't like. Make it harder on the poor, make it harder on identity minorities like trans people and gay folk, and that's what this is about. Right is white. What do you make of that criticism?
It's as wrong as Professor Lichtman's prediction. That is the rotten fruit of the mischaracterizations of the left on which they spent probably 3 or 4 times what we spent on the entire project. The whole point of Project 2025 is something that we've been doing since 1980, Chris, and you know this well, and that is to offer a corrective to the Wilsonian LBJ administrative state that has ballooned, not just in terms of the number of employees and the amount of money, but most importantly, it has abrogated the self-governance of the American people because it was and is so over the target. Never done on this scale. It was a real threat to the radical left, which couldn't run on their policy record because it was destroying the American dream. You only catch flack if you're over the target, which is why we will always do this work.
Kevin, open invitation. Now we're starting a new administration. I'd love to have you as part of this kind of, salon effective conversation we're going for here at NewsNation. Agree? Great. Disagree? Even better, but always with decency. I'll always allow you to make your points, and I appreciate your level of discourse. So you're always welcome here.
I am very happy to do that. I admire the way you go about it, so anytime, sir.
I may need you to make a call to future Secretary of State Rubio for me. He hates me. I'll talk to you soon, Kevin. Thank you very much. Take care. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. You make a lot of enemies in this business. Well, when you go after people, you hold. That's how it is. That's why you need friends who know other people. All right. Trump's presidency, Middle East. So what is the state of play there right now, right? We haven't really been there in a while. Arwa Damon has. She's back in Gaza. She says we need to act right now, and she'll tell you how. Israel made a big call. They don't want to let aid in. What will America do? Next.
There was just a major explosion. Juan Mustashfa? Someone's saying it's like on the hospital grounds.
All right, here are the facts, okay? That's what Arwa Damon is witnessing in Gaza, and she's a gift to you to be able to give you a present sense impression of what's happening. But just so you understand, there is the lowest level of aid going in there since December 2023. The UN is warning of famine conditions, okay? Tomorrow is the deadline for Israel to increase humanitarian supplies to Gaza, or else. The United States says 350 trucks a day. They're at like 150. Or else. What is the or else? The October 13th letter that was written jointly by Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin gave them 30 days. Or what? Okay? Let's bring in Arwa Damon. Remember, excellent journalist. A documentarian, but also head of INARA. You want to help 70% of the people who are wounded and dead in Gaza are women and children. You want to help them? INARA. INARA.org/donate. That's how you can give. Arwa, what are you seeing?
Chris, you're saying 150 trucks a day, but actually it's a lot less than that, significantly less than that, that's actually reaching the people. In that clip that you played, I was inside Al-Aqsa Hospital when that strike happened outside. And right before that took place, I was just visiting this little 2-year-old boy who had a severe blast injury. And if you look at the full clip on my Instagram, you see that his brain is sort of pulsing kind of from the top of his skull. And that's because, or the top of his head. And that's because his skull had broken open from the blast and they just were able to sort of close the skin over it. And it's the second time that this little boy had been pulled out from underneath the rubble. Now, the challenge, and I'm mentioning this because it shows just how little there is in Gaza, is that when he was in the ICU, the Al-Aqsa hospital did not have enough pediatric tracheostomy tubes. And basically, in layman's terms, that's the tubes that you need to put in to allow someone who's on a ventilator to be able to breathe with greater ease so that you can stabilize them and remove them from the ventilators. It's a tiny little piece of plastic, and you can't find it in kid sizes in Gaza. Now, last time I was here, was able to secure a very small amount of them. I was able to do that again this time. But the point is, so that little boy, life, or that little boy was able to stabilize because that tube was secured. But there have been countless other children who, just because of this little basic items unavailability, haven't been able to stabilize. We're talking about aid, as you were mentioning there, at some of its lowest levels. And that's not just things like food and water, that's soap and diapers and sanitary products. And on top of all of it, you have less and less access to medical care, and hospitals are functioning. I mean, they're barely functioning, and we've been saying this for, close to a year now.
All your years, all the different situations you've seen around the world, how do you characterize this one?
It's uncomparable, and that's not just because I don't like comparing war zones to each other or people suffering to each other. There is no way that you spend a day in a place like Gaza and really recognize the different ways that people, that, life in and of itself is being crushed, and don't end up thinking to yourself that this is an extermination of a population. It's not just about the relentless bombings, Chris. It's about the inability of aid organizations to move around. I mean, think about how, illogical it is. We're here. We're all here, and we're not able to provide what the people need. And the biggest obstacle to our being able to do that is Israel being unwilling to provide us with, access to the aid, meaning ease to bring the aid in. And then on top of that, have no safe way to move the aid from the border crossings into the warehouses. And then we're not able to easily move from south to north. And what we're afraid of, Chris, when we do move around through some of these areas, it's the Israeli checkpoints, because there have been so many incidents of aid convoys of humanitarians being shot at after they've gotten the green light from Israel.
Well, look, you will have a platform here whenever you want it. I keep pumping. I don't know what the standards are, and I don't care. But inara.org, I've given money to it. I've crowdsourced money for it. I believe in Arwa. I believe in what she's doing. Former president, now President-elect Trump, has spoken to Bibi several times. They supposedly have this great relationship. Trump wants it to end. The aid has to be the first step. The hostages have to be returned. But this can't end unless people there have a chance to survive. Arwa, thank you for making your witness. Appreciate you here. Stay safe. We'll be right back.